It seems the biggest issue people are having with using the original Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera in 2020 is finding the right memory cards. Now that's memory cards that are available to purchase new on the market, memory cards that are reliable and will actually work with the camera, and memory cards that are still affordable, because a lot of people, including myself, have touted this camera as a great option for the low budget filmmaker. But if memory cards cost more than the camera, what's the point in getting into it? Well, the good news is that I've done some research, I've purchased some cards, and I've got 3 options for you that will absolutely work with this camera and are available to purchase now on the market. That's 2 cards that absolutely are in the low budget realm, and one that costs a little bit more, but I think absolutely has a place in your toolbox when using this camera. So today I'm going to talk about all 3 of these cards. I'm going to tell you how much they cost, where you can buy them, what to look for to make sure you get the right one, and which card I think may be the best for you when using this camera. But first, if you're new to the channel, if you're just joining us, feel free to hit that subscribe button below, press the bell for notifications so you don't miss a thing. Look at this. I've been in Germany too long. This is how I count 3. So several weeks ago, I posted a video about the original Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera and its place in filmmaking today. And I gave rave reviews about this camera because I do truly love it as a tool, as a camera, as just, something to have fun with. As it turns out, memory cards and the technology behind them have advanced over the years, as it should. But because the Blackmagic line has discontinued the original Pocket Cinema camera, they are not updating the firmware for it, which means that when the new cards come out, the camera can't understand them, it can't read them. So when you buy and you put in a new memory card, it just flat out says no card. A lot of times you're trying to do research on this topic, you're going into forums, you're seeing people's opinions, and it's hard to really get concrete answers about this problem. People will just kind of list a huge list of memory cards and put little notes next to each one without any real recommendation about, okay, this one absolutely 100% works, here's where you buy it, go get it. So I wanted to provide that resource for you guys so that you would know what you can do in this situation, but also because I felt a little bit bad. I felt bad about recommending a camera that people might not be able to use. So to make up for that, we're going to talk about all the different options you've got with this issue. So the first memory card we're going to talk about seems to be the one that is most well known by the forums, and that is the Sandisk Extreme Pro 512GB 95 megabyte per second write speed. This card can be purchased on Amazon. I've come to find that it's a lot more expensive in the United States than it is here in Germany, which is a shock to me. 90% of the time, camera and camera technology is much more expensive in Europe than it is in the United States. But right now, this card is selling on Amazon.de for 127 euros, down from 150 just a few weeks ago. They're doing a discount for some reason, which is an outstanding price for this card and the amount of media that it holds. The same card is for sale in the United States for about $250. And I think that's where a lot of this debate started. When people read up about this card, realized it still was made and it was still available, and looked it up and then realized this card is almost as much as the camera, what's the point of buying it? And so they sort of wrote it off, and I've heard a lot of criticism about it. I might as well be buying an SSD drive for the new Blackmagic 4K rather than spending money on this card for the camera that I bought just to have fun with. Well, one, I think that's not quite fair to say, because honestly, even at the price in the United States for $250, this is a steal for how much this card holds and for the quality of the camera. Now, I know that's not what a lot of you want to hear right now, and we're going to get to the cheaper options in a second, but I do want you just to think about that for a minute. When you compare this to Red Mags, when you compare this to CFast cards, and the sheer cost that those have to hold this amount of data, 512. On the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, the original, this will hold 4.5 hours of raw footage shot at 24 frames a second. That's a lot of footage, that's a lot of raw material. So yes, $250, but it's getting you through an entire day. When I shot my second feature in 2016 with the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, this was the same make of card that we used on that shoot. Now, we only had the 128GB cards because this guy at the time cost almost $1,000, and so we were able to get the 128s for about $100 each, and we had 5 of those total, and I don't think I went through a single day of shooting where I filled up 4 of them. And had I been able to have afforded this at the time, I absolutely would have gone for it, because it was a little bit of a workflow issue on set, on the go, having to make sure that the cards you're swapping out were being marked, being set aside so that you didn't accidentally grab the wrong card. Not that that's something you're gonna readily do all the time, but it is a piece of your brain that you do have to set aside for that task on the day of the shoot, when you'd rather be filling it with other more important issues than making sure you're grabbing the right memory card. So one card to go for the entire day, I think, is an outstanding deal if you're buying and planning to use this camera for long format shoots. And then if you're in the ProRes settings, this will hold significantly more than just the 2.5 hours. The other thing I want to point out is that if you are using this camera for a client where you need to be able to shoot and handle that much data, or you're working on a project that really requires that much latitude, you should be building the cost of these cards into your quote. You should be billing your client for this. Even if it's just a little bit on top over time, the cost of this card should not be the reason to discourage you from buying and using the camera. So you want to be sure with the Sandisk Extremes, you're looking for the SDSDXPA model. Now, if you see a card and it's SDSDXXG, that is the wrong card. So keep an eye out for that. SDSDXPA is correct. SDSDXXG is the incorrect model number. So I know that sounds a little bit nitpicky, but it will make all the difference in making sure you get the right card when it comes to the Sandisk Extremes. The next card that I found to work and tested quite well with this camera is also in the Sandisk line. Now, it's not the Extreme Pro, it's actually the Ultra. So this particular one I got on Amazon for 21 euros. It's available in the United States also for 21 US dollars. Now, I discovered this card when I was perusing other eBay options, and I saw that a few people who were selling the camera had this card available with it. When you bought the camera, you got this card. And just knowing how eBay works, I knew that no one would sell a camera with a card that didn't work with the camera, because the last thing you want to do is sell someone something, risk having it show up and not work. And so I looked it up, and on the forums, there's no mention of it. Most people don't talk about this card because the specs don't actually line up. If you're looking at what this card can do and what it can handle, you would think that's not going to work with the camera. So I bought it anyway. I thought I'd test it out. I thought I'd see how it worked. So as this arrived, I'm putting it in, and sure enough, the first thing that happens is the camera takes a little bit. You see the dots forming above, and it says ready to use. I reformatted the card just to make sure that it would be 100% ready to go, and it formatted just fine. It said that below in 24 frames at RAW, I had the 38 minutes, so I knew it was holding the capacity that I was looking for. I hit record, and I just kind of kept an eye out to see if the frames would drop, because that's the thing people seem to wonder. If a card doesn't fit to spec, are you going to suffer from dropped frames? And this card did not suffer from dropped frames, to a degree. Let me clarify this. When I informed someone that this card was an option to use with the original Blackmagic Pocket, they said, okay, but did it work in RAW at 30 frames a second? And I thought, well, I don't know. I only tested this at 24 frames a second because I never shoot in 30. I don't really know anybody who does shoot in 30 on a regular basis. But I popped it back in, set my settings to 30, and sure enough, this one does fail if you're shooting at 30 frames a second in RAW. Now, if you're shooting at 30 frames per second in ProRes HQ, it still runs just fine. But if you're popping it in RAW, 30 frames a second, it is gonna fail on you at about 15 seconds. Now, that's an issue and it's not. I'll say this, I never shoot in 30 frames a second. I think 30 frames per second is one of the ugliest formats you can use. Not to frame shame, hashtag frame shame, I don't know. Can you be woke with camera talk? As a filmmaker who got their start in the 90s, early 2000s, we fought so hard to get cameras that shot in 24 because that was the first step to finally getting more cinematic image out of our cameras. We had very small chip cameras, very little lens control, and they're shooting 30 frames a second, and you just had this very disgusting video look no matter what camera you used. And one of the first really big things that happened was when our cameras got 24 frames a second, and honestly, I've never gone back. But anyway, I'm just not a fan of 30. So for me, the fact that this card doesn't work in RAW at 30 frames a second is not an issue. It works in 30 in ProRes in case for some reason I really had to do that. Okay. Now the counter argument was, well, what if my client absolutely wants me to shoot in 30 frames a second? And my response is, if you're going to be shooting with this camera for a client, invest in the better card. For my European viewers, it'll also work in 25 frames a second at RAW. I tested that as well. But I think absolutely if you're using this for a hobby, if you're using this just for fun, this card, 21 bucks, absolutely works with the camera, can't go wrong, great deal. Problem solved. Now, just like the Extremes with the Ultras, you do want to be sure you're searching for the right model number. I don't know if there's a huge discrepancy between these since they're all kind of older anyway, but just in case it is, before you purchase, scroll down and check the model number and be sure that it is the SDSDXPA model of this card. This is the one that I purchased, tested, and can verify for you that it works. So now the last card I'm going to talk about was a little bit of a surprise to me because I didn't see it listed on too many of the online forums, and I'm not really sure why. Now, I found out about it because someone in my last video had commented that this card did work for them. And so I went ahead and looked it up, and I found it on Amazon. It is the Kingston Canvas Select Plus, available both in the United States and in Europe on Amazon. 16 euros. 16 euros for this card. I had my doubts when it arrived. I really hoped it would work because I wanted to make this video and I wanted to have at least 3 options to talk about. So when it arrived, popped it in the camera, and the camera recognized it. Formatted it, set my settings, hit record, let it run for 10 minutes, not a single dropped frame. It's $23 in the US, so still an outstanding deal, a little bit more expensive than the last one we just talked about. But the good news is that if you are the guy or the gal that needs 30 frames a second in RAW, this is going to do it for you. It has the specs set to say it reads and writes at 100 megabytes a second, so it fits within the specs, and it actually also performs within those specs. So every frame rate you could want within RAW, this guy's got you covered. Any frame rate you want within ProRes, this guy's got you as well. The other good thing about the Kingston is that it's available in all different sizes. So if you still want to get 512 gigabytes, but you don't want to spend the 250 bucks or 150 euros on the Sandisk Extreme, you can get this for about 105 bucks US or 80 euros on Amazon, and it runs the gamut from 32 gigabytes all the way up to 512. So this is sort of the card, I guess, to rule them all. If you're really looking for that low budget option, the difference between this and the last one, yeah, $5 depending on where you are. But some of us, you know, $5 is a lot. So for the sake of saving that $5 and you don't need the 30 frames a second, I'd say you can drop back to the Sandisk Ultra. But you know what? This guy, like I said, will have you covered in just about anything you need or want. Now, which one's right for you? I think that's something you have to decide. I think it really depends on what your shoot is. I still have my original Sandisk 128 gigabyte cards that I bought 5 years ago that I shot my last feature on, and they still work 100%. So I think those have definitely stood the test of time, which is why I consider the Sandisk 512 to really be maybe the best bet, just because I haven't tested these to that extent. I have put these in the camera, made sure they worked, gone out shooting with them, experienced no issues whatsoever, but I haven't taken them through the full pace of something like shooting them on a feature, of formatting them 100 times, of taking them into extreme conditions, of you know, running them in heat, any of that stuff. So I'll verify that these will absolutely 100% work for you on the hobby level. I don't think you'll experience any issues. They're easily replaceable. But I think if you're going into a situation where, you know, you're shooting a feature or client work or something, and you've got a little bit of extra money to put into this, $100, $200 more, I would absolutely say, you know, bet the ranch on this guy. Maybe consider these more your hobby options. But that's 3 options for you. 2 well within anybody's budget, 1 a little bit more, but like I said, I think it absolutely has a place in your toolbox and is something to consider. So that's it. I hope you guys found this video helpful and informative. It means a lot to me that you guys trust me with this sort of stuff, and I want to be sure that the information that I'm putting out there is reliable. So I appreciate to the individuals that brought to my attention the memory card issue. I'm glad we were able to find some solutions. I hope that they are useful to you and that you can go forward and use this fantastic camera to make great art and make great projects. And it means a lot to me that you guys are trusting me to give you these recommendations. So thank you so much for joining. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to hit like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.